My blood ran cold as Amanda slid each glossy photograph across the polished mahogany dining table. One by one, the snapshots spilled into the light, me leaning in conversation at a cafe, my hand brushing someone's arm, my head tilted, smiling. Different men in different places. To the untrained eye, they painted a damning picture. To the family seated around me, they were the perfect weapons. The sharp intake of breath from my mother-in-law Eleanor filled the suddenly airless room. I could see her fingers tremble as she lifted one photo, her face twisting into an expression of disappointment so well rehearsed it almost seemed theatrical. "Sophie, how could you?" she whispered, her voice breaking with performative sorrow. "We welcomed you into our family." Once those words would have sliced me open, but now they fell flat because I knew the script she was following. Amanda, my sister-in-law, wasn't done. She stood with smug certainty, her hand perched on her hip as she pointed dramatically to the photos fanned across the table. While David has been working himself to exhaustion, she's been sneaking around town with other men, she announced, each syllable dripping with venom. Her other hand settled on David's shoulder, too familiar, too rehearsed, as if she were marking her territory right in front of me. On David's other side sat Jessica, the woman he had been sleeping with for months. She kept her eyes low, her silence screaming louder than any words could. Amanda's eyes glittered with triumph as she delivered her final blow. "Now you don't have to feel guilty about Jessica," she said sweetly. "And you definitely don't have to give Sophie anything in the divorce." And just like that, the trap they had been weaving for months was set. But here's the part they never anticipated. I had already seen it coming. My name is Sophie Bennett. I'm 32 years old, and this is the story of how I turned my husband's family's betrayal into their greatest downfall and my greatest transformation. I looked around the table, letting silence stretch, letting them believe they had cornered me. Amanda's chest rose proudly, as though she had finally won some private war against me. Eleanor's hand trembled over the photo like a judge about to deliver a sentence. David stared fixedly at his glass of water, too much of a coward to meet my eyes. George, my father-in-law, looked more uncomfortable than angry, his jaw twitching as though he wasn't entirely convinced of the play Amanda had staged. "Nice pictures," I said at last, my voice calm, almost amused. I picked one up between two fingers, holding it delicately. "The lighting is excellent. You must have paid your private investigator quite a lot." Amanda's triumphant smile faltered. This wasn't the tearful denial she had been expecting. "That's all you have to say," she snapped, her voice tightening. "You're not even going to deny it." I set the photo back on the pile, reached into my purse, and felt the air shift as the entire table braced for an emotional outburst. Instead, I pulled out my tablet and placed it on the table, the black screen glinting under the chandelier. "Why would I deny it?" My voice was steady. I tapped the screen. "Those men are all divorce lawyers." The silence that followed was so complete it was almost beautiful. Amanda blinked. "What?" I pointed to the photos one by one. "That's James Morrison, one of the best family lawyers in the city. This one, Michael Turner. His firm specializes in cases of infidelity. And here, William Parker. He's skilled at uncovering hidden assets before a divorce." Color drained from Amanda's face. Eleanor's lips parted, but no words came. David finally shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his father with a dawning suspicion. "You see," I continued, my voice still calm, "when I discovered David and Jessica 3 months ago, I decided to prepare properly." "You're lying," Amanda muttered, but the sharp edge of her confidence had dulled. I powered on the tablet. Emails, contracts, and consultation notes filled the screen. The wonderful thing about legal consultations is that there's always documentation. The photos they thought would bury me had become exhibits in my own defense. And then I twisted the knife. "But that's not even the most interesting part," I said lightly, shifting my gaze to David at last. "During one of those meetings, I learned something fascinating about your family's recent property transfers." George stiffened in his chair. David frowned, turning to his father. "Dad, is that why you had me sign those papers last month? You said it was just routine family business." I let the realization settle over him like a storm cloud. His family wasn't just helping him cheat. They were hiding assets, preparing to leave me with nothing. "David, sweetheart, we were just protecting you," Eleanor began. "Actually," I cut her off sharply, "you were committing fraud. and my lawyers have documented everything. Amanda collapsed into a chair, the architect of this charade, suddenly recognizing she was the one ensnared. You knew, she whispered, her eyes wide. I gathered the photographs into a neat stack and tucked them into my bag. Next time you hire a private investigator, I said coolly, make sure he isn't working for both sides. I rose, smoothing my dress, my heels striking the hardwood like a metronome of finality. At the door I paused, turning back just once. Thanks for the photos, they'll make excellent evidence. Only when I reached my car did I allow myself the smallest of smiles. They had thought they'd cornered me. They had no idea I'd been steps ahead all along. The next few days were chaos. My phone buzzed endlessly with messages from David's family threats, pleas, accusations. Amanda's texts shifted between rage and desperation. You can't do this to us. We're family. That word family rolled in my mind with bitter irony. They hadn't treated me like family when they plotted to strip me of everything. I archived the messages and pressed forward. The law office of James Morrison was polished and commanding, its walls lined with legal volumes, and its conference room glowing with quiet authority. This was where the real battle would take place. When David and his lawyer arrived, his parents trailing behind, I was already seated reviewing documents with James. Amanda attempted to enter with false confidence, but her eyes betrayed her. James began with surgical precision. One by one, he laid out every suspicious transfer of property, every hastily formed company, every movement of money designed to cut me out. David paled, Eleanor clutched George's arm, and Amanda tried to interject, only to be silenced by James's calm insistence on facts. These were normal family business decisions, David's lawyer protested weakly. Were they? I asked, sliding forward another document, because these records show my name being removed from assets exactly 3 months ago. The same week David began his affair. Quite the coincidence, isn't it? Amanda's face drained of color. George shifted, guilt radiating off him. He had always been the weak link, too concerned with reputation to withstand exposure. When James mentioned criminal charges, Eleanor gasped, clutching her pearls like a woman from a different century. Amanda lashed out, she's trying to ruin us. I turned to her, my voice calm, deliberate. No, Amanda, I'm protecting what I helped create. I leaned forward. Would you like me to play the recording of you and David discussing how to keep the gold digger from getting anything? Her face went ghostly pale. David's head snapped toward me. You recorded us. No, I replied smoothly. Jessica did. Once she realized you were planning to discard her too, she decided she preferred justice to loyalty. The room erupted. Eleanor wept. George demanded his lawyer. Amanda screamed about betrayal. David sat hollow, finally realizing just how thoroughly he'd been played. James raised his voice above the noise. Here's what's going to happen. We have enough to pursue criminal charges. Or you can sign a fair settlement today. Your choice. David's lawyer whispered furiously in his ear. I watched the fight drain from him, his arrogance evaporating into fear. At last, George placed a hand on his son's arm and muttered, Sign it, David. We can't let this get out. And so he did. One by one, they signed their perfect trap, inverted into a perfect downfall. As I stood to leave, David finally asked, his voice hoarse, When did you get so calculating? I met his eyes with a thin smile. I learned from the best. Family taught me. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. In the days that followed the settlement, my world became eerily quiet. Not peaceful, not yet, but hollow, like the silence after a thunderstorm, when you can still smell the rain on the ground. I thought victory would feel sweeter. I thought I would feel triumphant watching their empire of lies crumble. But instead, what I felt was exhaustion. Years of biting my tongue, of tolerating their disdain, of playing the dutiful wife while being painted as an intruder, all of it sat heavy in my chest. The settlement gave me more than I expected. Financial security, my rightful share of property, and most importantly, freedom. But freedom is complicated when you're carrying ghosts. I moved into a modest apartment downtown with large windows that overlooked the city skyline. For the first time in years, I had a space entirely my own. No footsteps in the hallway that weren't mine, no voices rising in judgment, no photos slid across the table like daggers. Just me and silence. The first night I slept there, I woke in a panic, certain I'd hear Amanda's voice or Eleanor's gasp of disappointment. but the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. My body, it seemed, hadn't yet caught up to my mind. Still, life went on. Work became my anchor. I poured myself into my projects, staying late at the office, relishing the distraction of deadlines and design boards. Colleagues who once saw me as quiet and reserved now noticed a new edge in me: confidence, precision. But the past has a way of seeping back in no matter how tightly you close the door. One afternoon, I was leaving the office when I saw Amanda across the street. She was on the phone. Her voice raised, her posture agitated. Her usual immaculate composure had cracked. Her blouse was wrinkled, her hair undone, her expression frazzled. For the first time, I saw her not as the puppeteer pulling strings, but as a woman unraveling under the weight of her own schemes. She noticed me, froze, then quickly turned away. That night, I received a text from an unknown number. "You ruined us. I hope you're happy." I stared at the words, half expecting to feel guilt. But instead, I felt a flicker of pity. Because the truth was, I hadn't ruined them. They had ruined themselves long before I intervened. I had simply refused to be collateral damage. Still, I couldn't shake the image of Amanda's cracked facade. A week later, Jessica called me, the last person I expected to hear from. "Before you hang up," she said quickly, her voice taut, "I need you to know I'm not with David anymore." I said nothing, waiting. "He lied to me too," she continued. "Told me I was different. Told me we had a future. But after the settlement, he tried to push me out just like you. That's why I gave you the recordings. I wasn't protecting you, Sophie. I was protecting myself." Her honesty startled me. There was no sugarcoating, no attempt at redemption, just blunt truth. "Thank you," I said finally, the words surprising even me. A bitter laugh escaped her. "Don't thank me. I should have walked away the moment I realized what he was. But I didn't. I guess we both learned the hard way." After the call, I sat in the quiet, my thoughts swirling. Jessica had been my enemy once, or at least that's how Amanda had painted her. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized we were both pawns in the same game. Both discarded when convenient. Both branded as betrayers by a family who thrived on manipulation. And slowly, pity began to soften the edges of my anger. But David was different. Rumors reached me through mutual acquaintances. He was drinking heavily. Contracts at his firm were failing. Clients didn't trust him anymore, not after whispers of fraud and shady transfers began circulating. His once proud reputation as the family's golden boy was tarnished beyond repair. One evening, I was walking home from the grocery store when I saw him. Sitting on the curb outside a bar, his tie loosened, his face pale and drawn. He looked up as I passed, his eyes widening with recognition. "Sophie," he slurred, trying to stand. "Wait, please." I froze. For a fleeting moment, I saw not the man who betrayed me, but the boy I once loved. The boy with dreams and sketches of houses, the boy who once held me as though I was his entire world. But that boy was long gone. "I don't owe you anything, David," I said softly and kept walking. His voice cracked behind me. "I made a mistake." I didn't look back. Because it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Over and over, he chose silence. He chose betrayal. He chose them. And now he was reaping the consequences. Yet even as I hardened myself, part of me mourned. Not for him, but for the years I had given, the love I had poured into someone who never valued it. Mourning, I realized, wasn't just for death. It was for wasted time, for broken trust, for the pieces of yourself you would never get back. Eleanor reached out next. A letter delivered in delicate cursive. "Dear Sophie, I know you may never forgive me, but I hope you'll read these words. I thought I was protecting my son. I didn't realize how much harm I caused you. I see it now, and I'm sorry." I read the letter twice, then folded it back into the envelope. The words were heavy, sincere even, but they arrived too late. Apologies, I had learned, don't erase damage. They only mark its outline. For weeks after, I felt torn between anger and compassion. Anger for what they had done. Compassion for the brokenness I could now see in them. I wondered if forgiveness was possible, if it even mattered. But forgiveness, I decided, wasn't for them. It was for me. So one night, I lit a candle, held Eleanor's letter over the flame, and watched it curl into ash. Not in rage, but in release. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Because revenge had carried me through the storm, but release would carry me into the future. The family who once sought to destroy me was unraveling piece by piece. Amanda's cracks were showing, David was drowning, Eleanor was finally tasting regret, and George, from what I heard, was retreating from public life, unwilling to face the whispers of scandal. And me, I was beginning again. Starting again wasn't simple. It never is. People talk about fresh starts as if they are clean, sharp moments, the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve, the signing of a paper, the first night in a new apartment. But the truth is, beginnings are messy. They're a patchwork of healing and hurting, of moving forward and being pulled back. They're waking up one morning feeling free and another morning feeling shattered by memories. In my new apartment, I learned this rhythm day by day. Some mornings, sunlight pouring through my window made me feel like I was finally alive again. Other mornings I woke with the sensation that the walls of my old house were still pressing in on me, with Eleanor's voice in my ear, Amanda's laughter echoing down the hallway, David's silence a weight heavier than any words. But slowly I began to build a life that belonged only to me. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during my marriage, women who had always been there waiting for me to choose myself again. They came over with bottles of wine and bags of takeout, filling my apartment with the kind of laughter that heals invisible wounds. We sat on the floor surrounded by half-open boxes, telling stories, making plans, daring to dream again. At work, my colleagues began to notice a different version of me. More decisive, more daring. I pitched bold projects and refused to be talked over in meetings. For the first time in years, my voice felt strong, unshakable. And it wasn't just about work, it was about reclaiming every part of me that had been diminished by the constant erosion of my ex-husband's family. But the universe, it seems, doesn't allow for clean breaks. One Friday evening, as I was leaving the office, I bumped into Amanda. She looked nothing like the poised woman who had once paraded photos across the dinner table. Her hair was frazzled, her clothes mismatched, her eyes hollow. She was carrying a stack of folders that slipped from her hands, scattering across the sidewalk. I hesitated before bending down to help. Our eyes met, and for the first time, there was no smugness, no triumph in her gaze. Only desperation. "You must be happy," she muttered bitterly, gathering papers. I held her gaze. "No, I'm not happy that you're broken. I'm just relieved that I'm not the one breaking anymore." Her face twisted, shame and anger colliding. She opened her mouth as if to retort, but no words came. And for the first time, Amanda had no weapon to wield against me. I walked away, and the click of my heels on the pavement felt like punctuation at the end of a long, ugly sentence. Not long after, Jessica reached out again. This time, she invited me for coffee. I considered declining, but something in her voice, hesitant, almost apologetic, made me agree. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe. She looked nervous, fiddling with her cup. "I know I'm the last person you ever wanted to see again," she began. "But I needed to tell you, I've left that entire world behind. David, his family, all of it. They used me too, Sophie. And I was foolish enough to think I was winning when I was just another pawn." Her honesty disarmed me. For months I had painted her as the villain. But looking at her now, I saw someone who had been manipulated by the same people who had manipulated me. "I don't hate you," I said softly, surprising myself. "I hate what they did to both of us." She blinked, her eyes glistening. Do you think we ever stop hating them?" I thought about it, stirring my coffee slowly. Maybe we don't stop hating. Maybe we just stop letting the hate control us. For the first time, Jessica smiled at me, and in that fragile, unlikely truce, I felt another layer of my pain peel away. Meanwhile, news about David continued to trickle in. His business was hemorrhaging clients. The whispers of fraud had spread further than I realized. Friends told me he looked older, worn down, a shadow of the man who once strutted into rooms like he owned them. One night I dreamed of him. Not the David I knew at the end, but the David from the beginning, the boy with sketches of houses, the one who whispered promises under blankets, the one I believed would build a future with me. I woke with tears on my pillow, mourning not the man he was, but the man he never became. Eleanor tried again, sending another letter. This one wasn't an apology, it was a plea. "The family isn't the same without you. Please, Sophie, can we talk?" I didn't reply, because what she really meant was, "We need you to hold us together again." But I had finally learned it wasn't my job to hold together people who had gleefully watched me break. Instead, I poured my energy into creating new memories. I hosted my first dinner party in my apartment. Just a few friends, candles, flickering laughter bouncing off the walls. Halfway through the night, as I poured wine, I froze, overwhelmed by the simple fact that everyone there was smiling at me, not judging me, not plotting behind my back, not waiting for me to fail. I excused myself, stepped onto the balcony, and let tears spill down my face. Tears of relief. Tears of release. Rebecca, my closest friend, joined me. She didn't ask questions. She just handed me a glass and said, "You made it, Sophie. You made it out." And in that moment, I realized she was right. Because survival isn't just about leaving the fire, it's about learning to breathe again without the smoke. But survival, I also knew, wasn't the end of my story. The more I rebuilt, the more I realized my voice mattered not just for me, but for others. Women began to reach out to me quietly, through mutual friends, through whispers. They wanted to know how I had walked away, how I had survived, how I had turned betrayal into a weapon instead of a wound. One night at a small gathering, I told my story aloud from beginning to end. The humiliation of the photos, the settlement, the loneliness, the rebuilding. When I finished, the room was silent, and then slowly hands reached for mine. Women whispered, "Me too." It was then I understood that my story wasn't just mine. It was a mirror for countless others. And maybe, just maybe, that was the true revenge. Not the settlement, not watching David's downfall, not even seeing Amanda's cracks. The true revenge was turning my pain into power and sharing it so no one else had to feel as alone as I once did. The winter that followed was one of the coldest I could remember. Snow piled high against the windows of my apartment, muffling the sounds of the city. The quiet was comforting but also dangerous. It gave me too much space to think. And with that space came memories, sharp and uninvited, of everything I had endured in that house. Some nights I would sit curled under a blanket with a glass of wine, staring at the frost creeping across the glass, and I would hear echoes of the past. Amanda's voice triumphant as she scattered those photographs. Eleanor's gasp, her hand clutching at her pearls, as if my supposed betrayal had wounded her more than anything her son had ever done. David's silence, heavy, complicit. Even in my freedom, the ghosts followed me. But healing is rarely a straight path. It winds, it circles. It forces you to look at your scars until you finally accept them as part of who you are. And I knew I couldn't move forward until I faced those ghosts one last time. That chance came unexpectedly. I was invited to a charity gala one evening, a work event, nothing more. But when I stepped into the grand hall, my breath caught. Across the room, surrounded by whispers and stares, stood David. His once tailored suit looked ill-fitted, his posture slouched. Beside him, Eleanor clung to his arm, her smile brittle, her eyes darting nervously, as though she could feel the weight of judgment pressing down from every corner of the room. And Amanda was there too, hovering close, her once flawless poise replaced with a tension she couldn't quite mask. For a moment I considered leaving, slipping away unnoticed. But then something shifted in me. I realized I didn't need to run anymore. This was my city, my circle, my life now. They no longer held power here. So I walked straight toward them. Eleanor was the first to notice, her eyes widening in surprise. "Sophie," she breathed, as though saying my name conjured a ghost. Amanda stiffened, her lips parting as if she wanted to spit venom, but no words came. David simply stared. I stopped in front of them, every eye in the room suddenly on us. My heart thundered, but my voice came out calm, steady. "Enjoying the evening?" The question was casual, but beneath it hummed years of unsaid truths. Eleanor fumbled, her voice trembling. We didn't expect to see you here." "Of course you didn't," I said softly. "You never expected to see me anywhere but beneath your thumb." Amanda's cheeks flushed scarlet. "You ruined us," she hissed, her voice low but venomous. I met her eyes, unflinching. "No, Amanda. You ruined yourselves. I just stopped letting you drag me down with you." For the first time she faltered. Her gaze dropped and silence stretched between us. David finally spoke, his voice rough, almost broken. "Sophie." I turned to him, waiting. His lips trembled. "I'm sorry." 2 words. Too late. But in them I heard not just apology, but defeat. The man who once stood so confidently at that dinner table was gone. What remained was a hollow echo. I nodded once, then turned and walked away. Not in anger, not in triumph, simply in closure. When I stepped onto the balcony of the gala hall, the cold air bit at my skin, but I felt lighter than I had in years. I hadn't needed to shout to argue to prove anything. My existence, my survival, my thriving, that was enough. Later that night, Rebecca called. "How was the gala?" I laughed softly. "I saw them." "Are you okay?" "Yes," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "For the first time, I really am." That moment became a turning point. The ghost that had followed me began to fade, replaced by something else purpose. I started writing late at night, pouring my story onto paper. At first, it was just for me, a way to bleed out the poison. But as the pages filled, I realized it wasn't just my story. It was a story so many women carried in silence: betrayal, manipulation, survival. So I shared it. Quietly at first. A blog post. Then a few more. To my surprise, people read them. Women reached out saying, "This is my life too." Strangers thanked me for giving words to their pain. And slowly, I began to see that my scars could light the way for others still trapped in the dark. One evening, I hosted a small circle at my apartment. Women gathered in my living room, candles glowing softly, tea steaming in mugs. One by one, they shared their stories. Stories of betrayal by partners, by in-laws, by families who were supposed to protect them. Stories of leaving, of rebuilding, of still being in the middle of the storm. When it was my turn, I told mine from the beginning. The photographs on the table, the settlement, the nights of loneliness, the mornings of quiet freedom. And when I finished, the room was silent until one woman whispered, "You gave me courage." That night I realized the truest revenge wasn't destroying the people who hurt me. The truest revenge was building a life so whole, so strong, so purposeful, that their betrayal became nothing more than a footnote in the story of who I became. The more I shared, the more I healed. The more I healed, the less power their shadows had over me. But still, late at night, I would sometimes sit by my window, staring at the city lights, and think of the girl I once was. The girl who sat at that dinner table trembling as photos slid across the wood. The girl who thought her life was over when her husband betrayed her. I wanted to reach back through time, hold her face in my hands, and whisper, "You will survive this. And you will rise higher than they ever imagined." Spring returned at last, carrying with it a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Blossoms opened along the sidewalks, and the air smelled of beginnings. I found myself walking longer routes home, not because I needed the exercise, but because I wanted to breathe it all in this new life, this freedom, this version of me that had clawed her way out of betrayal and into something resembling peace. But peace, I discovered, wasn't passive. It wasn't something that simply arrived at your doorstep one day wrapped in ribbon. Peace was work. Peace was choosing every single morning not to replay the past, but to rewrite the day ahead. Peace was the discipline of refusing to let the wounds define me any longer. And yet the scars remained. Some evenings, as the sun sank low over the skyline, I would curl into my favorite chair and feel the ache of it, the memory of the woman who once believed silence was safer than speaking, that endurance was love, that family loyalty meant sacrificing yourself. But scars, I realized, are not signs of weakness. They are proof of survival. David never reached out again after that gala night. I heard bits and pieces: his company dissolved, debts piled up, his parents scrambling to salvage what they could. Amanda's marriage fell apart not long after. Apparently, betrayal runs in patterns. Eleanor was seen less and less, her sharp presence fading from the circles she once dominated. Their downfall was not explosive, not dramatic. It was a slow unraveling, the kind that eats away at people from the inside out. And I was not untouched by grief, but I was unbroken. There was one moment, though, that stayed with me. I was sitting in a quiet cafe, working on my laptop, when I overheard a conversation at the next table. A young woman, barely out of college, whispered to her friend through tears, "His mom hates me. His sister treats me like I'm nothing. I don't know how much more I can take." My chest tightened. For a second, I was back at that dinner table, photographs sliding toward me like knives. I leaned over gently, offering her a napkin. "I don't mean to intrude," I said softly, "but I've been where you are, and I promise you are not nothing. Don't let them convince you otherwise." Her eyes widened, her tears pausing. She nodded, clutching the napkin as though it was a lifeline. When I left the cafe that day, I realized that was what my story had become, not just a personal survival tale, but a map for others who were still lost in their own storms. So I kept writing. I kept speaking. I kept turning my scars outward, not to showcase my pain, but to show others what survival looks like. Women began inviting me to panels, to support groups, to circles of healing. Each time I spoke, I felt lighter. Each time I listened to another woman's story, I felt less alone. And slowly my story stopped being about them, about David, about Amanda, about Eleanor. It became about me. About the life I was building, the woman I was becoming, the strength I had uncovered in the rubble of betrayal. Still, sometimes I would sit on my balcony at night, wine glass in hand, city lights flickering below, and whisper to the woman I used to be, "You made it. You're safe now. You chose yourself, and that choice saved you." On the anniversary of that fateful dinner, the night they thought they could erase me, I held a small gathering at my apartment. Just a few close friends, women who had walked beside me in my rebuilding. We toasted to survival, to freedom, to never again shrinking ourselves for the comfort of others. As laughter filled the room, I stepped onto the balcony for a moment of quiet. The air was cool, the city alive, and I realized something profound. Revenge had been the spark that fueled my escape, but it was not the destination. The destination was this peace-purpose community, a life rebuilt on my own terms. And that was the sweetest justice of all. So if you're listening to my story now, if you've ever sat at a table where the people you trusted turned into your accusers, if you've ever been painted as the villain in your own life, know this: you are not powerless. You are not voiceless. You can walk away. You can rebuild. You can take back your story one choice at a time. I did, and I promise you can too. If my story touched you, if it made you think of your own strength or reminded you of your worth, I hope you'll stay with me here. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories of survival, betrayal, and transformation. And tell me in the comments, what has betrayal taught you about yourself? Because in the end, betrayal doesn't just break us, it remakes us.